Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something really fascinating. We are going to break down a highly dramatized animated military documentary that recently popped up online, which maps out a massive, hypothetical geopolitical conflict set in the year 2025. Now, right off the bat, I want to be clear. Our goal here isn't to take sides or endorse any of the politics in this narrative. We are simply here to decode the timeline, the strategies, and the specific military claims the source material presents. So let's jump right in and see exactly how this modern warfare scenario actually unfolds. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this scenario, we have to ask a pretty big question. How in the world does a localized, on-the-ground incident snowball into an absolute clash involving over 100 fighter jets? It's like a giant domino effect of military and diplomatic moves stretching all the way from dense forest to massive aerial dogfights. So let's start at the very beginning. Okay, the inciting incident in this fictional timeline happens on the afternoon of April 22nd. Sometime between 1 and 2 p.m., 3 heavily armed militants emerged from the dense forests of Pahalgam. The source identifies these attackers as operatives of the resistance front, and they're armed with AK-47s and M4 carbines. And according to the story, they immediately target a group of tourists. The narrative is incredibly specific about the tragic human cost here. It claims 26 innocent lives were lost, 25 tourists, and 1 local named Adel. It alleges that the attackers specifically separated the tourists based on religious markers, like a tikka on their forehead. It's framed as this deeply traumatic event that is meant to completely shake the nation, which, as you can imagine, prompts an immediate and intense reaction from the absolute highest levels of government. Well, this kicks off a rapid, intense chain of escalation. The Prime Minister actually cuts short a trip to Saudi Arabia for an emergency security meeting. And right after that, a major diplomatic strike. India suspends the historic 1960 Indus Water Treaty to put a massive squeeze on the opposition's economy. Finally, total freedom is handed over to the military command to draft a devastating retaliatory plan. So the military plan that follows gets dubbed Operation Sindoor. But, that isn't just some random, cool-sounding code name. The animated documentary explicitly frames this as a tribute to the women who lost their husbands in that initial attack. In Hindu culture, Sindoor's a traditional vermilion mark worn by married women, and wiping it away actually symbolizes widowhood. The entire operation is built around avenging that specific loss, giving the whole narrative a heavy emotional weight. To execute this massive retaliation, the story introduces some seriously heavy hardware. We see the activation of the 222 Tiger Shark Squadron. They're flying Sukhoi 30 MKI fighter jets that have been specially modified to carry the BrahMos missile. Now, this is a supersonic cruise missile that travels at literally 3 times the speed of sound. The strategic logic the source relies on here is pretty fascinating. It's moving so incredibly fast that intercepting it with standard air defense systems is just nearly impossible. Let's look at how all this builds into the actual strike. Fast forward to May 7th. It's the dead of night, exactly 1:45 a.m. And the source points out a really clever tactical deception here. Instead of launching from the expected northern air bases, the jets take off from deep in southern India, like Tanjavur. When you combine that element of surprise with the extreme range of the BrahMos, it means these jets can launch devastating strikes without ever actually flying deep into enemy airspace. So what exactly were they aiming at? The narrative says they went after very specific infrastructure. We're talking about a JEM headquarters in Bahawalpur, an LET markaz in Meridke, and various training centers complete with communication hubs. At the exact same time, Indian artillery uses Pinaka rocket systems to just obliterate launch pads across the border. It's described as this surgically precise, non-military preemptive strike that even uses electronic jamming to completely blind enemy radars. But of course, the story doesn't just end there, right? By the very next morning, the opposition responds. To appease domestic anger, the Pakistani military launches a massive counteroffensive of their own named Operation Buniye-Marsus, which basically translates to Wall of Lead. This is a huge shift in the timeline. The conflict is officially upgraded from a targeted strike to a direct, full-blown clash between 2 national militaries. This counterattack involves literal swarms of drones and incoming missiles aimed straight at critical infrastructure. The primary targets here are major Indian air bases located in Pathankot, Udhampur, Batenda, and Srinagar. As the air raid sirens start wailing, the narrative shows opposition media immediately hitting the airwaves, claiming they've heavily damaged all these strategic locations. But the crucial point here is how the defending forces react. The animated narrative gives total credit to the S-400 Triumph system for completely neutralizing this counterattack.
This advanced missile shield, paired with an integrated anti-drone grid, intercepts the threats hundreds of kilometers away. The source proudly states that not a single piece of glass was broken on the Indian side, which sharply contrasts those earlier media claims with the reality of mid-air explosions happening way over the border.
With the missiles failing, the conflict moves straight into the skies. The narrative sets the stage for what it calls the largest aerial dogfight since the 1971 war. We've got Mirage 2000s, Sukhoi 30s, and Rafales going head-to-head against F-16s and JF-17s. Radar screens are just flooded with red and green dots, showing over 114 fighter jets engaged in this massive, chaotic battle for absolute air superiority. Looking at the claimed outcomes of this massive clash, the Indian Air Force reports shooting down 5 opposition jets. Now, the narrative does try to maintain a certain level of tactical realism here. It acknowledges that the Indian side actually suffered some initial losses due to a few tactical errors, but it insists those mistakes were rapidly corrected, allowing the forces to aggressively push forward and destroy opposition radar stations. Obviously, an escalation this intense grabs the immediate attention of global superpowers, who are terrified of a nuclear escalation. But interestingly, the resolution actually comes down to simple economics and logistics. By May 10th, the source claims the opposition's munitions are critically depleted and their economy is just on life support. Facing an internal rebellion, a ceasefire request comes through the military hotline, and at exactly 5 p.m., the guns finally fall silent. So, the narrative concludes that Operation Sindoor successfully achieved its goals. But wait, it leaves us with a huge cliffhanger. What about those 3 original attackers who committed the atrocity in the forests? Well, the story reveals that Suleiman Shah, Hamza Afghani, and Gibran actually survived and are still hiding in Kashmir. The source teases that the military has a totally different plan waiting just for them, setting the stage for something called Operation Mahadev. It's an absolutely fascinating look at how modern military storytelling blends heavy emotion, tactical jargon, and edge-of-your-seat suspense. So, what do you think would happen next in a scenario like this? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and always keep questioning the narratives you explore.